Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the next chapter in our series of aquaculture-related webinars designed to bring together science and business to expand and strengthen the United States aquaculture industry. These webinars are a joint effort between the National Aquaculture Association, the North Central Regional Aquaculture Center, and the United States Aquaculture Society. Whether you're currently engaged in aquaculture, looking to get into business, an educator helping others understand aquaculture, or just want to become a better educated consumer, we hope that these webinars will enhance your knowledge and move you forward on your journey to success. Today's webinar is entitled Social Media, an Introduction for Successful Use, and will be presented by Sarah Cornells, Senior Extension Associate in the Department of Agricultural Economics, Sociology, and Education at Penn State University. Sarah works in the area of agricultural entrepreneurship, focusing on business planning and decision-making, marketing, and value-added agriculture. She has particular interest in value-added dairy and the use of social media for agricultural farm and food business marketing. And don't forget to tune in at 3 p.m. Eastern Time on December 1st when Dr. Nick Phelps will discuss fish health for aquaculture producers.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to start by thanking the National Aquaculture Association for inviting me to speak on this topic. Social media has become an important marketing and communication tool for farms and small businesses. Now, I've been working in this area for about 8 years now, and it's been exciting and interesting to see how the tools and their uses developed. As I go throughout my presentation this afternoon, please feel free to ask questions in the chat box at any point in time, and I will try to answer them as I see them come in. Just to really quickly share an overview of what I'm going to touch upon this afternoon, we'll talk a little bit about websites versus social media, the value in having a social media presence, some of the popular platforms that are out there today, and then wrapping up with some best practices. Well, when I was beginning my career, I helped develop a workshop that covered the use of websites for ag businesses. As you might imagine, I don't really cover that anymore, but websites and social media both have their advantages and disadvantages. And here on this slide, I've tried to touch upon some of the highlights for each that you should consider. But keep in mind that the remainder of the presentation will focus solely on social media. So as we look at these two lists, I just really want to go through and talk about some of the differences in what you see I've highlighted here. Websites are typically very static, and they can be complicated to update depending on what platform and hosting service that you're using. However, they're very good for providing basic information such as addresses, phone numbers, or other information that doesn't change regularly. That way your audience and anybody that's looking for information can easily find it, and you don't have to respond to the same question over and over, either via phone calls or emails or social media. One thing to keep in mind if you do have a website is that it needs to be mobile friendly, and this is something that's already built into the social media platforms and that you don't have to worry about. Some other advantages to websites is that it's an easy way to maintain control of any messages that you're trying to get out to your audience, because there is that lack of communication and user engagement, that you are very much in control of the messages that you're sending out about yourself, your product, your businesses. And one other advantage is that if you are using social media, you can use your website as a hub, and so you can build in feeds from your different social media platforms, or guide users and followers from social media back to your website to view content. Some of the points I want to touch upon for social media is that it has the advantage of being very dynamic and operating in real time, and these are things that your audience values. It can be very good for conversations, follower engagement, having discussions about pertinent topics and things that come up just randomly that you want to engage your followers about, but that may be difficult to work into a more static website. There is a fairly easy user interface with all the different social media tools, whether you are posting text content or videos or images. All the sites have made it fairly simple to upload that content onto your account. And then finally, a key aspect is that the social media tools and sites have already been optimized for SEO, which is search engine optimization. So if you were to go into Google and search for a particular topic that was relevant for your industry, somebody that had a social media account, that's already going to be optimized to come up in the search engine results fairly high. So I wanted to start off the discussion just showing you what we've seen in the growth of social networking over the past decade or so. And you can see, back 2006, 2008, when I first started getting involved in social media use, the use of social media was fairly low among adults using the internet, anywhere from 15 to 25%. However, now you can see at the far right-hand side of the screen that we are up to over 75% of all the internet users using at least one social networking site, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, etc. Amongst all adults, we are over half of adults using social media at 65%. So you can see the penetration into today's lifestyle that social media has made. There are several reasons that we use social media, and these are for both individuals and businesses. So you want to keep in mind both your reasons for using social media as well as those that you're trying to interact with. And so communication really tops that list, and building relationships with whether it's family or businesses that they feel connection to. Some other uses are customer service, which I'll touch upon a little bit later on, advertising, and you can see at the very bottom I've listed entertainment. In many ways, entertainment is what we turn to for social media. And I just pulled some examples that I found on social media to illustrate these points. A couple of aquaculture related posts that I found, and the one in the upper right, you can see it's a little bit, they've shared a post from the National Ocean Service. So a little bit of education and information sharing, as well as kind of the lab looking image that is also there and kind of in the middle of the screen. And these are things that people might be interested in if they're interested in your industry. Again, a little bit of an insider look at seeing what you do in your business. But then also here at the bottom, you can see I've kind of captured the entertainment aspect as well. If any of you are familiar with Peterson Farm Brothers, they have a small band, I believe, but it's also a farming family, and they incorporated farming and information about farming into a more entertainment-oriented content. So hopefully you'll excuse me for some of my examples being a little bit more horticulture and direct marketing oriented. That's mostly the audience I work with here in Pennsylvania. But one of the points that I think is really important to know is that with social media, a lot of those individuals that I work with have noted that the engagement is really the most important aspect to them. And here I have a quote from Julie Flinchbaugh from Flinchbaugh's Orchard in South Central Pennsylvania, talking about the importance of what she calls chatter, in that she doesn't want followers on social media to see what they're posting. They want them to talk about it and really, generate conversation and discussion about different topics that they may post and share about throughout over time. And in this example, you can see the number of comments and also the interaction that's taking place between the individuals who have commented on the post and Flinch Falls Orchard. So they're not just putting up a piece of content onto, in this case, Facebook, but they're also responding to comments that are made on that post. So now let's take a quick step back and look at the usage of some of the different social media platforms. By far, Facebook is the most popular and widely used tool, with 72% of online adults indicating that they use it. And that's as of 2015. Of the tools shown in this graphic, Facebook has been in existence the longest, which explains some of that market penetration. However, you can see with the other 4 tools, Pinterest, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter, in general, there has been an increase in usage across the past 4 years. LinkedIn, it has a slight drop in 2015 in usage, but in general, that's still an upwards trend as well. This slide comes from a survey of about 560 consumers on how social media changes the way they buy and interact with brands. And it just simply, the question was, what platforms do you expect brands to have a presence on? And respondents were broken down into age demographic ranges. And you can see that across all age groups, Facebook really had a high, respondents had a high expectation of brands to be using Facebook and to have a presence on that tool. There was more variability among some of the other tools. Twitter, for instance, the younger demographics expected brands to be on Twitter, but yet once we, I think about 50% of 45 to 60-year-olds, but then it really dropped off in those over 60. Instagram, Pinterest, some of our newer social media tools. There's also lower expectations for businesses to be using those tools. But in general, our younger demographics have higher expectations for a business or a brand to be using any social media tool. Now compare that with the graph on this slide, and this was a survey that a colleague of mine did with wineries or for the winery industry, and consumers were asked what social media tools they believed a winery needed to be using. And again, we see Facebook, again, very popular, over 40% of the respondents indicating that a winery needed to be using Facebook. And with lower percentages indicating the need for Twitter, blogs, Pinterest, Instagram, or YouTube being required. And you can see that is also broken out by 3 states. But in general, the results were pretty similar across states. From a business perspective, what are the benefits of social media? I've listed out 5 here. Brand recognition and brand loyalty, kind of topping that, because you really are trying to develop a connection with your followers, and you want them to not only see your business and recognize who you are, but then also to develop a loyalty to you, and perhaps that's recommending your business to others or to do business with you. Certainly, having a presence on social media can improve your search engine rankings. If somebody is doing, say, a Google search for something related to you. It can help improve customer experiences, and I have another slide a little bit later on that speaks to this, as well as it can offer you an opportunity to improve some customer insights, or in other words, do some market research. And that's what I have a quick example of here on the slide as well, is again from Flintshaw's Orchard. They would do every winter for about 6 to 8 weeks, they would do a survey of their followers on social media. And I believe it was about once a week, they would ask a survey question. And the last I was aware, they were calling it Survey Saturday. So they even branded their survey efforts with their users. But they would ask questions about, products that followers wish to see in their market, layout of the market, all sorts of different questions that really help them to either make changes or additions or to their business to better meet the needs and desires of their market that they were trying to serve. And Julie Flinchbaugh again said that they actually used those results. So they weren't just doing it for the sake of doing it. They were actually using those results. And she reported, she couldn't give me specific numbers in terms of the return on investment from doing that, but she reported that it actually improved business. So there was a financial impact for them. And, just to follow up on that last point about the impact or the return on investment of social media, that has been something that's been difficult to capture, but one survey did try to capture this, and so that a survey was done, and they found that three different points here. Shoppers were more likely to make a purchase that same day when they used social media to help either before or during their trip, and that they were also, social media users were also more likely to spend more on their purchases as a result of that social media use. So those are important considerations to take into account when you're considering the use of social media for your business, is that if you really can make those connections, that there does appear to in fact be a financial payoff for you. And one of the earlier slides, I had mentioned customer service being a purpose or a reason for using social media. And again, there is a return on investment consideration to that, in that users are more likely to purchase from a business that responds to them on social media. So if you have a presence and whether you're responding to questions or concerns or complaints, and just in general interacting with followers and anybody who decides to engage you on social media, they're likely to reward you for that by continuing to purchase from you. If they see that you have a social media presence but you're not actively engaged and you're not responding, then they're less likely to do business with you. So now I quickly want to cover some of the key aspects for some of the most popular social media tools, and we won't cover all of this. I did find this was a nice graphic I found that kind of took a overview approach to some of the highlights for the different tools. So again, Facebook, the most popular tool, most users, and it's a tool that's very well oriented for building relationships because of the interaction that followers can have with the different businesses or individuals that they follow on Facebook. The downside being that it does have a limited reach with your followers and perhaps the friends of your followers, and part of that is they want to try to guide you into advertising with different sorts of advertising services that Facebook offers in order to broaden your reach. And so they do have their own revenue generation model that they're trying to follow as well. And just quickly to pick out some of the highlights from these other tools. I don't want to go through each of them since you can see them here on your screen. But Pinterest is a popular tool that if you have a female audience, that it might be something to consider if you have image-oriented content. So it requires that you have images and that you'll want to spend some time creating, I guess I'll call it sophisticated images that will appeal to the users of Pinterest. Instagram is another image-oriented tool, and that's I guess I should say, for those of you not familiar with the logos, Instagram is the second from the right. It looks like a little camera, and that tool supports both photos and video, just most recently, and is becoming very popular. Google Plus, if you happen to be interested in reaching a more tech-oriented male audience, that might be a tool to consider. However, it's not as widely used as some of these other ones. And I know I realize I'm bouncing around a little bit here, so I apologize. YouTube in the center, if you have things that you can explain through videos about how to or do-it-yourself sorts of topics, or frequently asked questions perhaps, that may be a tool for you to consider. The downside to that is because of the video aspect, it can be resource intensive to create a very nicely finished product in order to post to your YouTube page. And then finally, Twitter. Great tool for having conversations. However, you are limited by the characters limits, so 140 characters or less doesn't give you a lot of time or a lot of space to say what you want to say. And also there's the real-time aspect that we'll talk about again here in just a little bit. So as you can see, there are many different tools to choose from, and the ones I covered there on the last slide are just a few. So obviously there are others to consider as well. But you may be thinking, how do I choose which tool to use? And so here on the slide, I have some of the questions that I encourage those that I speak with and work with to consider as they make their decision. So first off, what are your goals? So if you have a business plan and with a marketing strategy written out in that, or even just in your head, you want to go back to that and think about, where does social media fit into this? Because you really want your use of social media to be facilitating the accomplishment of your business goals. Think about, who do you want to connect with? Are the audiences using social media and the specific different social media tools, are those your target market audience? If they are not, then really what you have to think hard about why you're considering social media. It's not right for everybody. However, there's a lot of opportunity to be creative and innovative with your social media use, and perhaps develop a niche for yourself. You also want to think about where your competition is. So what tools are they using, if any? If they're on Facebook, and you visit their Facebook page and see interaction and see some good content being posted, then that you can probably take that as a sign that Facebook is a tool that you may also want to consider for social media use. If your competitors have a presence on a social media tool, but you don't see a lot of interaction, it's a little bit more difficult to determine whether that's a tool for you to use. It could be an indicator that the audience is really not there on that tool, or it may be an indicator that your competitor has been unable to latch into them, and which may give you an opportunity. You have to think about what type of content you want to share. On the previous slide, you saw some notations of what each of the different tools were best for, whether it was images or video, or just plain some other text sharing. And so some tools are better for sharing certain types of content than others. And so you have to think about and try a forecast for yourself. What is it that you want to share, and see if that matches up with some of the other research findings that for where your market is. And then finally, how do you want to engage? All the different tools have different types of engagement available, as well as frequency of engagement that you need to consider. And so, speaking to that last point, I came across this illustration that kind of lays out how some of the social media tools compare to one another on some factors, which I think can be another useful way to consider which tool is the best fit for you and your business. On the y-axis, we have at the top, it says real time, and at the bottom, it says long-term relevance. And on the x-axis, you see at the right, it says sharing and reposting, as opposed to on the left, it says original content. And so the developers of this graphic kind of laid out where different social media tools fell in relation to those four factors. As you can see, Twitter at the top, it's very much real time. If you just step away from it for even 15 minutes, depending on how many other Twitter users you follow, and that, that conversation and the content that you're seeing can change drastically. Or a conversation can be completed and wrapped up in the time that you may go to get a drink of water. As opposed to, further down, we see Pinterest in the lower right. The content that is shared on Pinterest, that's going to stick around longer. It's a lot easier to find for somebody. The tools on the left, for instance, Instagram, YouTube, Tumblr, there's more of an expectation of followers and users of those tools that the content you share is your own original content, especially since most of those tools are more image oriented, as opposed to on the right, Facebook, LinkedIn, Pinterest. It's much more acceptable to share and repost content that you've sourced from other third parties. Perhaps going back to kind of an earlier slide, there was the one business that shared the video from the National Ocean Association, I believe that was called. And so that sort of resharing of content is very acceptable. And so you want to consider, within this sort of layout, where do you fall, and see if there's a tool that fits, that matches up. Also, when deciding upon social media tools to use, you need to consider your audience use of those tools. And one aspect to look at is the frequency with which they're using the tools and viewing content. So here on this little chart, we have Facebook at the top is showing that users of Facebook, 70% of users, checked into Facebook on a daily basis and were viewing the content in their newsfeed. And as we go down the list, the percentage of users who are using each of those tools on a daily basis gets smaller and smaller. And so on the one hand, Facebook can be a very good tool from the fact that you have a large audience, potentially large audience base, checking in on a very frequent basis. But something to keep in mind is that even though they're there, you don't want to be bombarding them with content all the time. And so you're going to have to be a little bit more reserved and scheduled, perhaps, in the way that you release content posts on Facebook. I know there's, for instance, I followed one page on Facebook, and invariably at about noon, I would get 4, 5, 6 posts from them would show up one right after the other in my news feed. And so that is really not the way to use that, even though, I was on Facebook and other users were on Facebook very frequently. On Twitter, while people were not as likely to be on Twitter on a daily basis, or a smaller percentage of users were on Twitter on a daily basis, very prolific Twitter use is acceptable, and you can do that. So kind of getting to what is a topic of great interest, some social media best practices. I have kind of a lengthy list here. I won't go through all of them, but I think the most important thing is probably this last point that I put in bold is that you need to provide value. Users will follow and unfollow businesses for several reasons, but really in the end what they're looking for is content that speaks to them and that they value. And so that's a little bit of an art. You may not be able to tap into that right from the outset if you're just getting started with social media. But over time, if you pay attention to posts and response, you should be able to figure out what they respond to the best and the type of content that your users follow. And so keeping that in mind, then you can focus on some of these other aspects regarding cross-linking your efforts if you're going to use multiple social media tools, listening to what your users and followers are telling you, whether it's through acts of unliking you or unfollowing you, or questions that they ask or comments that they made. You do want to be mindful that you're respectful of all types of engagement that you may experience, and it's particularly timely. And from a business perspective, be careful about the level of self-promotion and advertising that you actually do. I think all users expect that to a certain degree, but there is a threshold that you have to be wary of. Some social media don'ts, and I like to talk about these kind of separately from the best practices because they can sometimes get lost on some individuals. Again, the aggressive sales pitches and over promotion that some folks may do. I talked a lot about posting too often, so you do need to be careful. And there are tools that you can use within several of these sites and platforms to kind of monitor post performance, and you can get a feel for whether or not you're posting too often. And then finally, be careful about straying too far from your areas of business into other aspects, politics, sports, religion, etc. If it's not really pertinent to what you're trying to accomplish. Obviously, a little bit of some things, such as sports, may be okay if you can, if it's relevant for your location, or if you've got a business tie-in, that sort of thing. So, working towards kind of looking at performance of social media use, you should really try to figure out how you're going to measure your success with the use of any social media tool that you're using. If your true intent is to use it as a business tool to help you accomplish your business objectives. So you want to figure out, are you meeting those different social media, marketing, and business objectives that you laid out for yourself? Determine whether or not you're being efficient in your use of social media. Perhaps there's things that you could be doing differently. And if you're not being efficient or you're not meeting your objectives, where can you make changes? Perhaps it's the timing of posts. Perhaps it's the type of content that you're providing, or perhaps it's the platform itself. And as I mentioned, there are analytic tools within several of these social media platforms that allow you to look at user engagement measures such as likes, comments, follows, reposts, or sharing. You can also get a feel for when your followers are online, whether you're seeing increases and decreases in the numbers of followers that you have. They may not be the best measures, but it's better than nothing. And finally, just to wrap up, you really keep in mind that social media is all about relationships. So your goal is to really create, develop, and maintain relationships with your followers, whether they're customers or the general public. And that really is, I think, the key thing to keep in mind, even as you try to develop perhaps objectives that may increase the profitability of your business.